Some say courage isn't the absence of fear, but choosing to stand tall when terror would crush your spirit into dust. That woman's been warned twice now. No decent white widow should be living near a Negro. Time somebody taught them both about proper frontier society. Montana Territory, 1883, a place where the color of your skin determined your right to breathe free, and where a widow named Catherine Reid was about to discover that some battles can only be won by refusing to surrender. Catherine, get inside before they see you. I buried my fear along with my husband Jeremiah. I won't be hiding anymore. Why should you watch this story to the very end? Because what happened next would shock an entire territory and prove that sometimes the most unlikely alliances forge the strongest bonds. This is a story of friendship that defied every rule of 1883 Montana, and the price both heroes paid for their courage. Don't you dare click away before seeing how this unfolds. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell, because stories like these need to be heard. If this is your first time discovering the Black Rancher, welcome to the channel where we uncover the buried stories of black heroes who shaped the American frontier. These are the tales history books tried to erase, but truth has a way of rising from the dust. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story of defiance, friendship, and a woman who refused to hide will change how you see courage forever. And trust me, stay until the very end. What Catherine Reid does in the final chapter will leave you speechless. Now let's ride back to Glacier Valley, Montana Territory, where a friendship that shouldn't have existed was about to change two lives forever. Glacier Valley, Montana Territory, September 1883. The morning frost clung to the cabin windows like lace as Catherine Reid stepped onto her porch, rifle in hand. At 34, widowhood had carved lines of hardship into her once soft features, but her green eyes still held the fierce determination that had carried her through two brutal Montana winters. 6 months had passed since pneumonia claimed her husband Thomas, leaving her alone on their modest homestead at the edge of Glacier Valley. The one-room cabin sat on 160 acres of decent grazing land, not much by Montana standards, but enough to run a small herd of cattle and maybe build a life worth living. But neighbors in Montana Territory had strong opinions about who deserved such a life. Catherine scanned the tree line, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. For 3 weeks now, she'd sensed eyes watching her from the dense pine forest that bordered her property. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of men on horseback, always staying just beyond rifle range. The message was clear: a woman alone was vulnerable prey. Mrs. Reid. She spun around, rifle raised, only to find Jeremiah Washington emerging from the trees to her west, the opposite direction from where she'd been watching. The Black Rancher moved with the quiet confidence of a man who'd learned to survive where he wasn't wanted. At 41, Jeremiah was tall and lean, with graying hair at his temples and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. He owned the Triple J Ranch 5 miles north, 200 acres of prime grazing land he'd purchased with money earned as a Buffalo Soldier after the war between the states. Jeremiah. Catherine lowered her rifle but kept it ready, not from fear of him but from habit, born of necessity. What brings you out so early? Same thing that's had you watching those trees for weeks, he said, nodding toward the forest. Trouble's coming, Catherine, and it's coming today. Her stomach tightened. What kind of trouble? The kind that rides in groups of 6 and carries rope instead of sense. Jeremiah's voice was grim. Heard talk in town yesterday. Some of the men from the Double M Ranch been drinking heavy and talking about cleaning up the valley, making it fit for proper Christian families. Catherine felt ice form in her chest. The Double M was owned by Marcus Morrison, a cattle baron who'd made no secret of his belief that Montana Territory was no place for single women or black landowners. Morrison commanded respect through fear and employed men who settled disputes with violence. They're coming here? That's what I aim to find out. But Catherine... Jeremiah stepped closer, his voice urgent. When they come, you need to get inside that cabin and stay there. Lock the door, close the shutters, and don't come out no matter what you hear. And let them burn my home. Drive me off my land. Catherine's voice rose. I won't run, Jeremiah. Thomas and I built this place with our own hands. I'll be damned if I'll let Morrison's bullies scare me away. This ain't about being scared. It's about being smart. Jeremiah's eyes flicked toward the tree line. A woman and a Negro standing together in this valley. That's two kinds of wrong in their minds. We give them any excuse and they'll... The sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning air. Multiple horses, riding hard from the direction of town. Catherine, get inside now. No. She raised the rifle, checking the load. This is my land. If Morrison wants it, he can try to take it. But I won't hide like some frightened child. Damn it, woman. Don't you woman me, Jeremiah Washington. I've made my choice. The riders burst from the tree line, 6 men on horseback, led by a burly figure Catherine recognized as Jake Morrison, Marcus Morrison's eldest son. Behind him rode Tom Fletcher, the Double M foreman, and 4 ranch hands she didn't know by name but recognized by reputation. They pulled up 50 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a semicircle. Jake Morrison was a thick-built man of 28, with cold blue eyes and a perpetual sneer. He wore expensive boots and carried a Colt .45 like it was part of his arm. Well, well, Jake called out, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Look what we got here, a widow and her Negro friend playing house in the wilderness. Catherine felt Jeremiah tense beside her, but his voice remained calm. Morning, Jake. Nice day for a ride. Shut up when your betters are talking, boy. Jake's hand drifted toward his gun. I'm here to have words with the lady. Then speak your piece and ride on, Catherine said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Jake laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. You got sand, I'll give you that, but sand don't make a woman fit to hold prime grazing land in Glacier Valley. The land office says different. The land office is run by fools back east who don't understand Montana. Jake leaned forward in his saddle. See, Mrs. Reid, you got yourself a problem. Winter's coming and you're all alone out here. Anything could happen to a woman alone. Cabin could catch fire. Cattle could wander off. Could be dangerous accidents. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a bad fire. But, Jake continued, my father's a generous man. He's prepared to offer you $500 for your land. Fair price considering your circumstances. Catherine knew the land was worth triple that amount, maybe more. Not interested. Not asking. Jake's voice hardened. You got 3 days to pack your things and clear out. After that, we can't guarantee your safety. You threatening me, Jake Morrison? Just stating facts, ma'am. Montana territory ain't no place for a woman alone, especially one who keeps questionable company. His gaze flicked to Jeremiah, and Catherine saw murder in those cold blue eyes. Gentlemen, Jeremiah said quietly, I think you've said your piece. Time to move along. Tom Fletcher, the foreman, spoke for the first time. Nobody asked your opinion, Buffalo Soldier. Matter of fact, we got some advice for you too. Might be time to consider selling that spread of yours. Find somewhere more suitable for your kind. My kind? You know what I mean. The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Catherine could feel the situation spiraling toward violence, and she knew once that line was crossed, there'd be no going back. But instead of fear, she felt something else rising in her chest. Anger. Pure, clean anger at men who thought they could intimidate her off her own land just because she was alone. I'll give you boys some advice of my own, she said, raising her rifle. This conversation is over. Ride off my land and don't come back unless you're invited. Jake's face darkened. You pulling a gun on me, woman? I'm holding a gun on my own property while talking to unwelcome visitors. Big difference. For a moment, Catherine thought Jake might draw. She could see his hand twitching near his holster, could feel the violence hanging in the air like a gathering storm. But Tom Fletcher reached over and touched his boss's arm. Easy, Jake. Ain't worth the noise. Not yet. Jake's eyes never left Catherine's face. 3 days, Mrs. Reid. Pack light. You'll be traveling fast. The riders wheeled their horses and thundered back toward the tree line, leaving a cloud of dust and the echo of threats hanging in the morning air. Catherine didn't lower her rifle until they disappeared completely. Only then did she realize her hands were trembling. "You should have gone inside," Jeremiah said quietly, "and missed all the fun." Catherine managed a weak smile. "Besides, if I'm going to die on this land, I'll die standing up. Ain't nobody dying if I can help it." Jeremiah's voice was grim with determination. "But Catherine, those men aren't going to give up. Jake Morrison's got his father's pride and twice the mean. 3 days from now, they'll be back with more men and less patience. Then I'll be ready for them." "Will you? Because ready means more than just courage and a rifle. Ready means understanding what you're really fighting for." Catherine looked out across her small spread. The cabin she and Thomas had built, log by log, the pasture where their cattle grazed, the vegetable garden that had fed them through 2 hard winters. This wasn't just land to her. It was home. It was future. It was proof that a woman could make her own way in an unforgiving world. "I'm fighting for the right to exist," she said simply. "To live where I choose and answer to nobody but God and my own conscience." Jeremiah studied her face for a long moment. "Then you better understand something, Catherine Reid. The fight you're picking isn't just with Jake Morrison or his father's ranch. You're fighting against the way things have always been in Montana territory, the way some folks think they should always be. And what about you? What are you fighting for?" A ghost of a smile crossed Jeremiah's weathered features. "Same thing as you, I reckon. The right to be left alone on land I bought and paid for. The right to live free. Then we're fighting the same battle. Maybe, but that don't make it any easier to win." As Jeremiah mounted his horse to ride back to his own spread, Catherine remained on her porch, rifle across her knees, watching the tree line. Somewhere out there, Jake Morrison was planning his next move. And in 3 days, she'd find out whether courage and determination were enough to hold her ground against men who believed might made right. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning frost, but the chill in Catherine's bones had nothing to do with the weather. She was about to discover that some battles choose you, whether you're ready or not. 2 days later, Glacier Valley Catherine's axe bit into the pine log with a satisfying thud, sending wood chips flying across her small clearing. For 2 days she'd been preparing for Jake Morrison's return, and preparation meant more than just checking her ammunition and cleaning her rifle. If Morrison's men planned to burn her out, she needed a defensible position. She'd spent yesterday boarding up the cabin's windows, leaving only narrow slots for rifle fire. Today she was splitting enough firewood to last through a siege. The rhythmic chopping helped calm her nerves, but it couldn't silence the voice in her head reminding her that tomorrow was the deadline. 3 days, Jake had said. Tomorrow, they'd be back. "You're gonna work yourself to death before they get the chance." Catherine spun around to find Jeremiah emerging from the tree line, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. "Thought you might could use some help," he said, dismounting near her woodpile. "Jeremiah, you shouldn't be here." "If Morrison's men see you, let 'em see." His voice was calm, but Catherine caught the steel underneath. "Been thinking about what you said, about fighting the same battle. Figured maybe it's time to stop fighting it alone." Catherine leaned on her axe handle, studying his face. "That's a dangerous kind of thinking for a black man in Montana territory. Being black in Montana territory is dangerous, period. Least this way, I get to choose my danger." Jeremiah began unloading the pack horse, revealing supplies that made Catherine's eyes widen. Boxes of ammunition, coiled rope, several bags of flour and coffee, and most surprising of all, 2 additional rifles. "Jeremiah, I can't accept—" "Not charity," he interrupted. "Investment. Your land borders mine. If Morrison drives you off, how long you think it'll be before he starts eyeing the Triple J? Black man with 200 acres of prime grazing land. That's an insult to his vision of proper Montana society." Catherine watched him stack the supplies on her porch, his movements efficient and purposeful. "You've thought this through." "Had to. Been living in hostile territory since the day I bought my first acre. Learned early that sometimes you got to make a stand, even when the odds are stacked against you. And if we lose—" Jeremiah paused in his work, meeting her eyes directly. "Then we lose fighting for something that matters. That's more than most folks can say." They spent the rest of the morning fortifying the cabin and surrounding area. Jeremiah proved surprisingly knowledgeable about defensive tactics, skills learned during his years as a buffalo soldier. Together, They positioned the extra rifles at strategic points and mapped out fields of fire from the cabin windows. "You were cavalry?" Catherine asked as they took a break for coffee. 10th Cavalry Regiment. Served 5 years fighting Apache and Comanche, protecting railroad crews and surveying parties. Jeremiah's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing old news. Ironic, when you think about it. Spent all that time protecting white settlers, and now some of their sons want to run me off my own land. The Apache and Comanche, were they really as fierce as the stories say? Fierce? Hell yes. But fierce don't mean mindless. They were fighting for their homeland, their way of life. Can't fault a man for that, even when you're on the opposite side. Jeremiah sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Matter of fact, I learned to respect them more than some of the white officers I served under. Catherine absorbed this, thinking about her own situation. Is that how you see this, as fighting for our homeland? Ain't it? This valley, these mountains, this is home now. Worth defending. As the afternoon wore on, they continued their preparations. Jeremiah showed Catherine how to create improvised barriers using overturned furniture and how to reload quickly under pressure. His calm competence was reassuring, but Catherine couldn't shake the knowledge that they were vastly outnumbered. "Jeremiah," she said as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, "there's something I need to say. If tomorrow goes bad, if they kill us both, I want you to know I'm grateful. For your friendship, for your help, for treating me like an equal instead of a helpless woman. Catherine Reid, you're many things, but helpless ain't one of them. Any woman who can split wood like you do and face down Jake Morrison with a rifle, that woman don't need nobody's protection, just somebody watching her back. Still, if my stubbornness gets you killed..." "My choice," Jeremiah said firmly. "Nobody forced me here. I came because sometimes a man's got to decide what kind of man he wants to be. And I'd rather be the kind who stands with his friends than the kind who watches them fall alone." As evening descended, Jeremiah prepared to ride back to his own ranch. But before mounting his horse, he turned back to Catherine with an expression she couldn't quite read. "There's something you should know," he said, "about tomorrow, about what we're really facing." Catherine's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Rode into town this afternoon, did some listening. Morrison's not just bringing his regular hands tomorrow. Word is he's hired some drifters. Hard men, the kind who solve problems with bullets instead of words." "How many?" "Maybe a dozen, maybe more." Jeremiah's voice was grim. "Catherine, this ain't going to be just about scaring you off. Morrison's decided to make an example out of you. Show the whole valley what happens to folks who don't know their place." Catherine felt cold despite the warm evening air. A dozen gunmen against 2 people, no matter how determined, seemed like impossible odds. "You can still ride away," she said quietly. "Tonight. Nobody would blame you." "You planning to run?" "No." "Then neither am I." Jeremiah swung up into his saddle. "Catherine, whatever happens tomorrow, remember this. Courage ain't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared to death. Will I see you in the morning? Before dawn. We'll want to be ready when they come." He paused, his weathered face serious in the fading light. "And Catherine, don't let them talk you into surrendering. Men like Morrison, they see mercy as weakness. You give them an inch, they'll take your life." After Jeremiah rode away, Catherine sat on her porch as full darkness settled over the valley. Somewhere in that darkness, Jake Morrison and his hired guns were making their own preparations. Tomorrow would bring violence. She was certain of that now. The only question was whether she and Jeremiah would survive it. She thought about Thomas, about the dreams they'd shared for this little homestead. He'd been a gentle man, more comfortable with books than guns, but he'd understood the value of standing up for what mattered. If he were here now, what would he tell her to do? The answer came without hesitation. Fight. Fight for the land they'd claimed together. Fight for the right to exist without permission from men like Marcus Morrison. Fight for the principle that courage and determination mattered more than power and intimidation. Catherine stood up, rifle in hand, and walked the perimeter of her property one last time. Tomorrow she'd discover whether that principle was worth dying for. Tonight she was certain it was worth living for. The bonds of friendship can be forged in the strangest places and tested by the cruelest enemies. If you're discovering these hidden stories of courage for the first time, you need to subscribe to The Black Rancher right now. Hit that notification bell because stories like Catherine and Jeremiah's deserve to be shared and remembered. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Chapter 4 will show you exactly what Catherine Reid was made of and the price she was willing to pay for freedom. Glacier Valley. Dawn, third day. Catherine woke before sunrise, not from any sound but from the electric tension that seemed to fill the pre-dawn air. She'd slept fitfully, fully dressed with her rifle beside her bed, and now pale grey light was seeping through the gaps in her boarded windows. She'd barely finished making coffee when a soft whistle outside told her Jeremiah had arrived. She cracked the door to let him in, noting he carried 2 rifles and wore a gun belt she'd never seen before. "They're coming," he said without preamble. "Spotted their campfire smoke about 3 miles east. Figure they'll be here within the hour." Catherine nodded, surprised by how calm she felt. The waiting was over. Now there was only the doing. How many? 12, maybe 15. Couldn't get close enough for an exact count. Jeremiah checked the loads in both rifles. "But Catherine, there's something else. Morrison's with them. Marcus Morrison himself." Catherine's blood chilled. Marcus Morrison rarely left his main ranch, preferring to let others handle his dirty work. If he was riding with the men coming to evict her, this wasn't just about her land anymore. This was about sending a message to the entire valley. "He wants to watch," she said, understanding immediately. "Wants to make sure it's done right, and wants everyone to know he was here when it happened." Jeremiah positioned himself by the east window. "Catherine, when they come, they're going to try to talk first. Offer you one last chance to leave peaceable. Don't listen. Don't negotiate. Men like Morrison, they see talking as a sign of weakness." "What do I say?" "Nothing. Let your rifle do the talking." As the sun climbed higher, they took their positions. Catherine by the south window, Jeremiah covering the east approach. The waiting stretched every nerve to breaking point until finally the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley. They came in formation, 15 mounted men with Marcus Morrison at their center. At 62, Morrison was a large man with silver hair and cold gray eyes that had seen 40 years of Montana Territory politics. He'd built his empire through a combination of shrewd business sense and calculated brutality. Beside him rode his son Jake, and behind them came the hired guns, hard-faced men with the look of professional killers. Catherine recognized the type from Thomas's stories of the range wars further south. Men who solved problems with violence and asked no questions as long as the pay was good. The riders stopped 50 yards from the cabin, forming a wide semicircle that would make escape impossible. "Mrs. Catherine Reid," Morrison's voice carried easily across the distance, "I believe you know why we're here. Your deadline has passed." Catherine cracked her rifle through the firing slot, but said nothing. "I'm prepared to be generous," Morrison continued. "One last offer, $750 for your land. More than fair considering your situation." Still silence from the cabin. Morrison's voice hardened. "Mrs. Reid, I strongly advise you to accept. The alternative will be unpleasant. She's had her chances, Pa." Jake Morrison's voice was eager, hungry for violence. "Time to get this done. Patience, son. The lady deserves every opportunity to be reasonable." But Morrison's eyes were scanning the cabin, looking for weaknesses. "Mrs. Reid, surely you understand your position. A woman alone cannot hope to prevail against 15 armed men." Catherine finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the morning air. "Mr. Morrison, you're trespassing on my land. I suggest you leave. Now." Morrison's laugh was like breaking ice. "Your land? My dear woman, you seem to have confused ownership with temporary possession. This valley belongs to those strong enough to hold it. Then I guess we'll find out how strong you really are." The challenge hung in the air like gun smoke. Catherine could see Morrison's face darken even at this distance. He wasn't accustomed to defiance, especially from a woman. "Boys," Morrison said quietly, "I believe the lady has made her choice. Tom, take 4 men and circle around to the back. Billy, you and your boys cover the sides. Jake, you're with me. We'll give her one more chance to surrender. Catherine's heart hammered as she watched the riders split up surrounding the cabin. This was it, the moment when talk ended and bullets began flying. Mrs. Reid, Morrison called out again. Last chance. Come out with your hands up and nobody gets hurt. Catherine looked across the cabin at Jeremiah, who met her eyes with a slight nod. They both knew Morrison was lying. Once she surrendered, she'd be at the mercy of men who showed none. Instead of answering, Catherine aimed carefully at Jake Morrison and squeezed the trigger. The rifle crack echoed across the valley like thunder. Jake's hat flew off his head and his horse reared in panic. For a moment, deadly silence returned to Glacier Valley. Then Marcus Morrison's roar of rage shattered the quiet. Burn them out! The battle erupted with devastating suddenness. Muzzle flashes bloomed around the cabin as Morrison's men opened fire from multiple directions. Bullets splintered through the wooden walls and shattered the remaining glass in the windows. Catherine ducked low as lead sang overhead, then rose to return fire. Her second shot took down one of the hired guns, sending him tumbling from his saddle. Beside her, Jeremiah's rifle spoke with deadly precision, dropping another attacker. But 15 against 2 were impossible odds. Within minutes, the cabin was taking fire from all sides, and Catherine could smell smoke. Someone had managed to set fire to the back wall. Catherine, Jeremiah called over the gunfire. They're trying to burn us out. We need to move. Where? Catherine fired again, seeing another man duck behind cover. They've got us surrounded. The root cellar, it's stone, won't burn. Catherine had almost forgotten about the small root cellar Thomas had dug behind the cabin. It was little more than a hole in the ground with stone walls, but it might provide better cover than the burning cabin. Smoke was pouring through the walls now, making it hard to breathe. Catherine grabbed extra ammunition and followed Jeremiah toward the back door. On my count, he said, checking his rifle. 3, 2, 1. They burst through the door, running low toward the cellar entrance. Bullets whined past them, kicking up dirt at their feet. Jeremiah made it first, diving into the cellar opening. Catherine was 3 steps behind when something sledgehammered into her left shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the ground hard, rolling toward the cellar as Jeremiah reached up to drag her to safety. Blood was soaking through her shirt, but her right arm still worked. How bad? Jeremiah asked, examining the wound. Hurts like hell, but I can still shoot. Catherine gritted her teeth as she reloaded her rifle. How long can we hold them off from here? Long enough, Jeremiah said grimly. Question is, long enough for what? Above them, the cabin was burning freely now, flames reaching toward the morning sky. Catherine could hear Morrison's men calling to each other, coordinating their final assault. Soon they'd rush the cellar from all sides. Jeremiah, Catherine said quietly, if this is the end... Ain't the end yet, he interrupted. Long as we got bullets and breath, we keep fighting. Catherine nodded, checking her ammunition. 4 shots left in the rifle, 6 in the pistol Thomas had given her. Not much against 15 men, but enough to make them pay for victory. Outside, Marcus Morrison was shouting orders. Close in! They're wounded and low on ammunition. Finish this! Catherine could hear boots running toward their position from multiple directions. She looked at Jeremiah. This man who'd risked everything to stand beside her and made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Before he could respond, she rose from the cellar opening, rifle raised, and spoke words that would echo across Glacier Valley for decades to come. Come and take it. The root cellar. Glacier Valley. The first man to reach the cellar never saw Catherine's rifle barrel emerge from the stone opening. Her shot took him center mass, dropping him 5 feet from her position. But his death cry brought the others running faster. She's in the root cellar! Jake Morrison's voice cracked with rage and excitement. Torch it! Smoke 'em out like rabbits! From her position, Catherine could see boots approaching from 3 directions. She fired again, catching another attacker in the leg and sending him howling back to cover. But the wound in her shoulder was making it harder to aim, and blood loss was sapping her strength. Beside her, Jeremiah was methodically picking targets, his buffalo soldier training evident in every carefully aimed shot. But they both knew the mathematics of the situation. Too many enemies, too little ammunition, and nowhere left to run. "Catherine," Jeremiah said between shots, "when they rush us, and they will, you stay down. Let me handle the close work." Like hell. Catherine reloaded her rifle despite the fire in her shoulder. "We started this together, we'll finish it together." Stubborn woman, stubborn enough. Above them, someone was trying to drop burning wood into the cellar opening. Jeremiah shot him before he could complete the task, but more smoke was beginning to filter down from the burning cabin above. "Time's running out," Marcus Morrison called from his safe position behind a wagon. "Mrs. Reid, you fought bravely, but this is over. Surrender now, and I give you my word you'll be treated with respect." Catherine almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Morrison's word was worth less than the smoke choking the air around them. "Your word ain't worth spit, Morrison," she called back. "And I don't surrender to bullies. Then you'll die for nothing. Better than living as nothing." The exchange seemed to enrage Morrison beyond reason. "Enough, rush them, all of you. I want this ended now." Catherine heard the sound she'd been dreading, multiple men charging their position simultaneously. This was the final assault, the moment when courage and determination would either triumph or fail completely. She rose from the cellar opening, rifle ready, as armed figures appeared from 3 directions. Her first shot dropped the nearest man, but the second came up empty. She was out of ammunition. Drawing Thomas's pistol, she fired again and again, each shot carefully placed despite the chaos around her. Beside her, Jeremiah's rifle spoke with deadly precision, but there were simply too many targets. A bullet creased her scalp, spinning her around. Another shattered against the stone wall inches from her head. Catherine knew they had seconds left before being overrun. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the middle of a gun battle. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses approaching fast from the west. "What in hell?" Jake Morrison's voice cut off abruptly as the new riders crested the ridge. Catherine risked a glance and couldn't believe what she saw. Sheriff Ben Crawford, Marcus Morrison's own brother-in-law, was leading a posse of 6 men directly toward the gun battle. Behind him rode several men Catherine recognized from town, including Dr. Matthew Hayes and Merchant Samuel Cooper. "Cease fire!" Crawford's voice boomed across the valley. "In the name of the law, cease fire!" The shooting sputtered to a halt as Morrison's men looked uncertainly at their employer. Marcus Morrison sat his horse in stunned silence, clearly not expecting this intervention. Crawford rode directly to Morrison, his face grim. "Marcus, what in God's name is happening here?" "Sheriff business, Ben. Nothing that concerns the law." "The hell it doesn't." Crawford's voice was furious. "You brought an army to evict one woman? Burn down her home? This is attempted murder, not a civil dispute. She's squatting on land that should belong to productive ranchers. She's on land she owns legal and proper." Crawford pulled out a document from his saddlebag. "Checked the land office records myself. Catherine Reid holds clear title to this homestead, purchased and paid for in 1881. Catherine felt her knees go weak. Crawford had come to help her. Morrison's own brother-in-law was taking her side. Marcus Morrison's face was flushed with rage. "Ben, you don't understand the situation." "I understand it fine. You wanted her land, so you decided to take it by force. That's called theft, Marcus. And in Montana Territory, we hang horse thieves and land thieves the same. You can't arrest me for protecting community standards. I can arrest you for arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy." Crawford's hand moved to his gun. "Question is whether you want to come quiet or make this harder on yourself." For a moment, Catherine thought Morrison might draw on his own brother-in-law. The cattle baron's face was purple with rage, and his hand twitched near his holster. But Jake Morrison, for all his cruelty, wasn't stupid. He could count, and Crawford's posse was well armed and positioned. "This isn't over," Morrison said finally. "Sheriff or no sheriff, this valley ain't big enough for—" "Marcus!" Crawford's voice was ice cold. "Shut up before I decide to add threatening an officer to your charges." Catherine watched in amazement as the most powerful man in Glacier Valley was reduced to impotent fury by the simple application of actual law. Dr. Hayes approached the cellar opening carefully. "Mrs. Reid, are you injured?" "Shot in the shoulder," Catherine managed, still not quite believing what was happening. "But I'll live. Let me have a look at that wound." As Dr. Hayes began examining her shoulder, Catherine looked around at the aftermath of the battle. 3 of Morrison's hired guns lay dead, 2 more were wounded. Her cabin was a smoldering ruin, but she was alive and still owned her land. "Sheriff Crawford," she called out as he finished arresting Marcus Morrison. "What made you come here?" Crawford smiled grimly. "Your friend there." He nodded toward Jeremiah, who was emerging from the cellar with his rifle. "Mr. Washington rode into town before dawn, told me what Morrison was planning. Took me a while to round up enough men willing to stand against Marcus Morrison, but we got here in time." Catherine stared at Jeremiah in amazement. "You knew? You knew they were coming and you came anyway?" "Somebody had to warn the sheriff," Jeremiah said simply, "and somebody had to stand with you until help arrived. Figured I could do both. But if Crawford hadn't come, then we'd have made our stand and let the chips fall where they may." Jeremiah reloaded his rifle with practiced ease. "Sometimes you got to trust that doing right will bring others to your side." As the prisoners were loaded into Crawford's wagon and the wounded were treated, Catherine sat on what remained of her front porch, trying to process what had just happened. Her home was destroyed, but her land was secure. Morrison was under arrest, but his hatred remained. The battle was won, but the war for acceptance in Glacier Valley was far from over. Dr. Hayes finished bandaging her shoulder and stepped back. "You'll live, Mrs. Reid, but that was closer than you know. Another inch lower and that bullet would have hit an artery. Thank you, Doctor. Don't thank me. Thank your friend there, and maybe think about building yourself a new cabin with better shooting positions. Something tells me this won't be the last time you'll need them." As the posse prepared to leave with their prisoners, Sheriff Crawford approached Catherine one final time. "Mrs. Reid, I want you to know what you did here today, standing up to Marcus Morrison. It took real courage. Folks in the valley will remember that. Will they remember it when Morrison makes bail, when he comes back with more men and better lawyers?" Crawford's expression was grim. "Morrison's got powerful friends, that's true, but he's also got powerful enemies now. What he did here today, trying to drive off a legal landowner by force, that's the kind of thing that worries every small rancher in the territory." "Meaning?" "Meaning you're not alone anymore. Morrison made this about more than just your land. He made it about whether the law matters in Montana territory or just power and intimidation." As the posse rode away with their prisoners, Catherine found herself alone with Jeremiah in the ruins of her homestead. The cabin was a total loss, but the barn had survived, and the land was still hers. "What now?" she asked. Jeremiah looked around at the damage, then back at her. "Now we rebuild, better than before, and this time we build it with friends. If you'll have me as a neighbor and partner. Seems to me 2 spreads side by side might do better than 2 spreads fighting the world alone." Catherine looked at this man who had risked everything to stand beside her, who had trusted the law to prevail even when it seemed impossible. In a world that tried to divide people by color and gender and class, they had found something more important: shared principles and mutual respect. "Partners," she said, extending her hand. "Partners," Jeremiah agreed, shaking it firmly. As they began planning the new cabin, Catherine realized that Morrison had been wrong about one thing. The valley was big enough for anyone brave enough to claim their place in it and strong enough to defend what they'd built. The war wasn't over, but today's battle had proven that sometimes when good people stand together, justice could prevail even in the Montana Territory of 1883. 6 months later, Glacier Valley. The new cabin stood where the old one had burned, but it was different, stronger, larger, and built with friends in mind. Catherine ran her hand along the smooth pine logs, marveling at the craftsmanship. What had started as a simple replacement had become something more, a symbol of what could be accomplished when good people worked together. "Mrs. Reid." Catherine looked up to see young Billy Cooper running across her pasture, his merchant father Samuel following at a more dignified pace. Behind them came Dr. Hayes and his wife Margaret, along with 3 other families from town. "Billy, "What's got you so excited?" Catherine asked, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "Pa says you got the finest cabin in the valley now. Says it's big enough for proper gatherings." Samuel Cooper caught up to his son, tipping his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, hope you don't mind us coming by unannounced, but we brought something for your housewarming." Catherine watched in amazement as the families began unpacking wagons loaded with furniture, dishes, quilts, and food. Dr. Hayes carried a beautifully crafted rocking chair, while his wife Margaret held a set of china that must have come from back east. "Folks, this is too much." "Nonsense," Margaret Hayes interrupted gently. "After what you went through standing up to Morrison, this is the least we can do. Besides, the valley needs a proper gathering place, somewhere decent families can come together." Catherine felt tears threatening. 6 months ago, she'd been alone and unwanted. Now neighbors she barely knew were treating her like family. Jeremiah emerged from the barn where he'd been checking on the new horses. His Triple J ranch had prospered since Morrison's arrest, and he'd been able to expand his herd considerably. "Jeremiah!" Billy Cooper ran to him excitedly. "Did you see? Ma brought her apple pie." "Did she now?" Jeremiah's face lit up. Mrs. Cooper's apple pie was legendary throughout the valley. "Well then, I better get washed up proper." As the gathering grew, Catherine found herself marveling at the changes 6 months had brought. Marcus Morrison was still in prison awaiting trial, his empire managed by court-appointed administrators. Jake Morrison had left the territory entirely, reportedly heading to California. The Double M Ranch was being sold off piece by piece to pay Morrison's legal debts. More importantly, the valley itself had changed. The smaller ranchers, no longer living in fear of Morrison's retaliation, had begun working together. They'd formed a cattlemen's association, started a school, and were even talking about bringing in a proper church. "Catherine," Dr. Hayes approached with a serious expression. "Might I have a word in private?" They stepped aside from the growing celebration, and Hayes lowered his voice. "I wanted you to know I received a letter yesterday. Morrison's lawyer is trying to get the charges reduced, claims it was all a misunderstanding about property boundaries." Catherine's stomach tightened. She'd known this day would come. What are the chances he'll succeed? Hard to say. Morrison's got friends in territorial politics, but he's also made new enemies with his actions here, and Sheriff Crawford's report was very detailed about what really happened. What can I do? Nothing right now, just be prepared that this might not be over. Hayes glanced around at the gathering. But look at this, Catherine. 6 months ago, these people barely knew you existed. Now you're the center of their community. That's not something Morrison can take away, no matter how many lawyers he hires. As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself thinking about Dr. Hayes's words. The gathering was indeed remarkable. Ranchers and townsfolk who had once viewed her with suspicion now treated her with genuine respect and affection. "You're thinking too hard," Jeremiah said, joining her on the porch as the sun began to set. "Just reflecting on how much has changed." "Changed for the better, I'd say." Jeremiah gestured toward the group gathered in her front yard. "Look at that. Cooper's boy playing with the Hayes children, the Petersons sharing stories with the O'Briens. This is what community looks like when it ain't ruled by fear." Catherine nodded, watching the easy camaraderie among families who might never have spoken if Morrison hadn't forced them to choose sides. "Jeremiah," she said quietly, "what if Morrison gets out? What if he comes back? Then he'll find a different valley than the one he left. These folks have tasted freedom from his bullying. They won't give it up easy. And us? What about us?" Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment. "Catherine, I got something I've been meaning to discuss with you about our partnership." Her heart sank. Was he pulling out? Had the events of the past months convinced him that staying near her was too dangerous? "I've been thinking about expanding," Jeremiah continued. "Maybe building a bigger house on my spread. Maybe finding someone to share it with." Catherine blinked in surprise. This wasn't what she'd expected to hear. "What I'm trying to say, in my fumbling way, is that I've grown mighty fond of having you as a neighbor. But I'd be even fonder of having you as something more if you'd be willing." Catherine stared at him, completely caught off guard. "Jeremiah, are you proposing?" "Yes, ma'am. I believe I am." His voice was steady, but she could see nervousness in his eyes. "I know it's complicated. Black man and white woman in Montana Territory, that's going to cause talk. Maybe worse than talk." "Let them talk," Catherine said firmly. "I'm done caring what small-minded people think." "Is that a yes?" Catherine looked out at the gathering in her yard. These people who had become family, this land she had nearly died to defend, this man who had stood beside her when death seemed certain. "Jeremiah Washington," she said, standing up and facing him directly. "I'd be honored to marry you, but on one condition." "What's that?" "We build our life right here, on this land. Whatever comes, whoever objects, we stand our ground together." "Together?" Jeremiah agreed, taking her hands in his. "Come what may." As they embraced, Catherine heard a cheer go up from the gathering. Apparently, their conversation hadn't been as private as they'd thought. "About time," Mrs. Cooper called out. "We were wondering when you two would stop dancing around each other." Dr. Hayes raised his glass of cider. "To Catherine and Jeremiah, two of the bravest people in Montana Territory." The toast was echoed by every voice in the gathering, and Catherine felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening fire. This was home. This was family. This was what she had fought for without even knowing it. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and the dishes were cleaned, Catherine and Jeremiah sat on the porch watching the stars emerge over Glacier Valley. "You know Morrison will probably be out within a year," Catherine said quietly. "Probably. And when he returns, he'll want revenge on both of us." "Most likely. We might have to fight this battle all over again." Jeremiah took her hand. "Catherine, I learned something important during the war, and I learned it again when we faced Morrison. The battles worth fighting are never fought just once. Freedom, justice, the right to live with dignity. Those things have to be defended over and over again. And you're willing to keep defending them, even knowing the cost? Especially knowing the cost." Jeremiah squeezed her hand gently. "Because the alternative, living in fear, bowing to bullies, accepting less than we deserve, that's not living at all. That's just surviving." Catherine looked out across her land, the land she had defended with blood and courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, possibly new enemies. Morrison might return, or someone like him might take his place. The battles for acceptance and equality were far from over. But tonight, sitting with the man she loved in the home she had built with her own hands, Catherine Reid felt something she had never experienced before: complete and utter peace. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of knowing exactly who she was and exactly where she belonged. "No more hiding," she whispered. "No more hiding," Jeremiah agreed. And in Glacier Valley, Montana Territory, under a blanket of stars that had witnessed humanity's struggles for countless generations, two people who refused to be broken, prepared to face whatever tomorrow might bring together. And that's how Catherine Reid and Jeremiah Washington proved that courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about standing firm in what's right, even when the whole world seems stacked against you. Their story reminds us that the most important battles aren't won with guns and violence, but with principle, determination, and the willingness to stand together when it matters most. If this story moved you like it moved me, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like Catherine and Jeremiah's deserve to be remembered and retold. Here at the Black Rancher, we're uncovering the forgotten tales of courage from America's frontier. Stories of black heroes, brave women, and unlikely alliances that shaped our nation's character. Thank you for riding with me today through the trials and triumphs of Glacier Valley. Remember, sometimes the strongest fence you can build is the one made of courage and conviction. Those barriers will never fail you. Until next time, keep standing your ground and defending what matters. The West was built by people who refused to back down, and that spirit lives on in every one of us.